Hey there. So, this one might be a little spicy. We are going to talk about mind control, but not in the conspiracy theory spiral your brain kind of way. I'm talking about the very real, very intentional, and very subtle ways you've been shaped. Not just by what you were told, but by what you were shown over and over until you thought it was your own truth. This episode isn't about fear. It's about clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you get your choice back. You stop blaming yourself for feeling numb, confused, ashamed, reactive, and you realize, oh, I was programmed to think this way. And the moment you see it, that's the moment you get to take the wheel again. So let's talk about it. Let's rewind the tape. Let's take a little walk through how the artificial matrix of our modern world was actually built, not just technologically, but energetically. And then let's talk about how you take your mind back, not with force, but with truth. So let's start in the mid-20th century. World War II had just ended. Men came home different. Women were changed too, because many had worked, provided, and held the home. And the children, they absorbed everything with no language for what they felt. This was a world full of unprocessed trauma. There was no therapy movement, no somatic healing, no space for grief. There was just get back to normal. And then came the television. This glowing box became the new hearth of the household. But instead of tending a fire, we were now watching a script. The earliest TV shows weren't just entertainment. They were instruction manuals. And it's no wonder they were called programs. How to be a good man, how to be a good wife, how to be a quiet child. You weren't supposed to feel deeply, you were supposed to perform stability. Smile wide, keep busy, numb out. And if your grief, rage, or confusion started to surface, you were offered alcohol, cigarettes, pills, religion, work, shopping, anything but emotional truth. The generation traumatized by war was handed a screen and told, this is how you're supposed to look. This is what life should be. And they believed it, because they needed something, anything, to make sense of the immensity they'd just lived through. But here's the catch. What they received wasn't healing. It was programming. And that programming didn't just stop with them. It became culture. It became norms. It became the subconscious instructions that shaped the world you grew up in. This was the first layer of what I call the artificial matrix, a reality based not on truth, but on performance. And it wasn't just on the screen. It got into the body. When you watched enough commercials, enough sitcoms, enough ads for beer and tranquilizers and miracle diets, you started to think, this is how people live. This is how I should be. The television didn't just entertain, it entrained. It trained your nervous system to associate a certain rhythm, a certain tone, a certain normal with safety. And when you deviated from that, when you felt too much or didn't fit or started asking questions, you thought you were the problem. But you were never the problem. You were just waking up inside someone else's story. So once television normalized the script, what happened next? Control scaled, consumption surged, and emotional truth got buried even deeper. Because if the first layer of programming was who to be, the next layer was, here's what's wrong with you, and here's what to buy to fix it. This was the golden era of advertising, the birth of modern branding, the moment when identity, insecurity, and capitalism merged. And you know what fueled it? Unfelt emotion. Grief, fear, longing, desire, all those deep human currents had been labeled as weakness, as illness, as hysteria or neuroses, or not being grateful for what you have. So when those feelings naturally rose up, because they always do, people didn't know how to meet them. They outsourced. And the media was ready. It said, oh, you're sad? Here's a drink. You're restless? Buy this car. You feel invisible? Wear this lipstick. You feel powerless? Vote for this man. You feel scared? Watch the news cycle. And it worked. Not because people were weak, but because they were unattuned to themselves. Because the true self had never been modeled, only the mask. Over time, this became the baseline. We have built an entire society on buying identities, numbing emotions, performing roles, fearing stillness, and staying externally focused at all costs. And it worked in a way. It gave people something to do, something to hold, a sense of belonging, even if it wasn't based on truth. But under the surface, karmic backpack got heavier. The trauma didn't go away, it just went inward, got passed down, encoded into families, normalized through culture. And then new tools arrived to reinforce the matrix even more. Cable, talk radio, 24-hour news, the internet, smartphones, social media. Each one a little more addictive, each one a little more embedded, each one a little more intimate with your psyche. Now, we don't just watch the program, we carry the program in our pockets. We wake up and reach for it. We scroll to regulate. We consume more data in 1 hour than our ancestors did in a month, but we feel more disconnected than ever. And this is by design. Because the more distracted you are, the less you feel. The less you feel, the less you question. The less you question, the more obedient you become. And that brings us to something I really want to name, with a lot of compassion: the boomer generation. They were raised by war survivors, taught not to cry, not to ask, not to disobey, told to trust authority, follow the rules, and build a life that looked good on paper. And so, for many, the news became the ultimate authority. It was predictable. It had the tone of certainty. It sounded like truth. So today, when that generation watches the world change faster than they can process, they turn to the only structure that still feels familiar: the TV, the news. The same script that told them how to be now tells them what to fear, and they believe it because they were taught to, because it was never safe not to. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding the inheritance. We are all walking around inside belief systems that were built on emotional suppression, media projection, and unresolved trauma. But here's the good news. You can unplug from all of it, not with rebellion, with sovereignty. So now that we've looked at how the matrix was built, let's talk about how it's maintained. Because this isn't just about screens and media. It's not just the information you're fed, it's the frequency you're entrained into. The artificial matrix isn't physical, it's energetic. It's a synthetic reality woven from fear, distraction, and disassociation, a web that stays stable as long as you stay reactive. Let me say that again. The artificial matrix needs your reaction to stay alive. It needs you to doubt your body, distrust your emotions, outsource your truth, and chase answers instead of embodying wisdom. It needs you to stay in fight, flight, scroll, repeat. Because as long as your nervous system is in a loop, as long as your attention is hooked, you're not in your field. You're not creating. You're consuming. And consumption is what keeps the matrix running. This is why every major institution, media, education, religion, politics, has leaned into the same basic strategy. Keep people disoriented, not fully asleep, but not quite awake, just awake enough to feel anxious, but not grounded enough to trust themselves. And when that happens, people seek safety in the program, in the old familiar stories, even if those stories are false, painful, or degrading, because at least they're predictable. But here's the real trick. The matrix doesn't just run on control. It runs on your agreement. It needs your yes, even if that yes is unconscious. It needs your consent to stay fragmented, to numb instead of feel, to conform instead of express, to believe you are only a mind and that your mind needs to be managed by something external. This is why emotional repression was step 1, because the moment you feel deeply, you become harder to control. You can't manipulate someone who knows what's real inside their body. You can't override someone who's in tune with their own resonance, which is why the artificial matrix is allergic to presence, because presence collapses the control field. Presence turns off the program. And that brings us to the most important truth of this episode. The matrix isn't the only reality. It's just the most programmed one, the most rehearsed, but it's not the most true. Truth lives in your field, in your body, in your breath, in the quiet part of you that already knows, I'm here to remember, not to obey. Let's talk about the mind, because here's the thing. You were never meant to control other people's minds, and no one else was ever meant to control yours. But somewhere along the way, we all got tricked into thinking that the mind was supposed to be in charge, that it was the top of the hierarchy, that if you could think clearly, analyze enough, follow the right scripts, you'd finally feel safe, finally feel worthy, finally feel in control. But the truth? The mind was never meant to lead. It's not the captain. It's not the compass. It's not the source of your truth. It's the processor. It's the translator, the brilliant assistant that interprets sensory and emotional data and helps you move through reality. When it's aligned with the heart and soul, the deeper architecture, the mind is an incredible ally. But when it's left to run the show alone, it becomes a tyrant, a loop machine, a paranoid narrator, always waiting for something to go wrong. This is what happens when the mind is put in the driver's seat without direction. It tries to make meaning out of chaos, and it calls it reality. It projects fear forward and calls it logic. It rehearses pain and calls it safety. It clings to the program and calls it truth. But when the heart is online, when the body is grounded, when the soul is back in the room, the mind remembers its place. It's not here to dominate. It's here to serve. It's not here to define you. It's here to support you in expressing who you already are. And that is the real liberation. Not to shut off the mind, but to take the keys back. To say, thank you for your input, but I'm driving now. The only mind you were ever meant to manage is your own. And even then, it was never meant to be managed through fear. It was meant to be guided by something deeper, by your breath, by your heart, by the part of you that's still intact even after all the programming. The soul does not control the mind. It reorients it. It says, come with me. I remember where we're going. So here's what I want you to know after everything we've explored. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are remembering. You are shedding layers of programming that were never meant to fit the size of your soul. And as you do that, as you unplug from the matrix of mind control, distraction, and distortion, you'll feel disoriented at times. You'll feel like you don't belong in this version of the world. You'll grieve the version of you who once believed the story. That's all part of it. Because when you step out of the program, you step into a field where truth is felt, not fed. So, what now? Now, you slow down. You notice what thoughts are running in the background and ask, is this mine? Is this true? Is this loving? You stop letting fear write the rules. You start using the mind the way it was meant to be used, as a brilliant sensory translator, not the CEO of your life. You let your soul set the tone. You let your body be the compass. You let your heart drive. You choose presence over programming, not once, but over and over until it becomes your rhythm. And when you feel yourself slipping back into the loop, into fear, urgency, shame, comparison, you pause, you breathe, you remember, I am not here to obey. I am here to remember. I am not here to perform. I'm here to embody. I'm not here to be controlled. I'm here to create. This is the real work. This is the unplugging. Not with rage or shame or blame, but with clarity. The matrix isn't collapsed in one giant act. It dissolves every time one person stops reacting and starts choosing. You can do that. You already are. And your mind? It's not your enemy. It's waiting to be restored to its rightful place in service to the truth that lives inside you. Thank you for walking this with me. You are not alone. You're not lost. You're just reorienting to something real. And you're doing it beautifully.